septic, that you're asking all these really deep questions. Well, if we build the story properly, and if we're using the right game, which is where we're really going to kind of, focus our lens today, you will find that by telling the right story in a way, you have a more immersive form of therapy where people can explore these themes without a lot of fear, without a lot of feeling that, the therapist is being very kind of confrontational or very intrusive. So these stories allow people to kind of gently go through these ideas of what it is that they're trying to explore. And, we have a ton of different examples that we're going to talk to as we're going through the presentation, just about, how people arrive at how they build their character. And realistically, the way that we always talk about group is, not that Professor X is creepy, but we often review our groups kind of like a danger room or a holodeck, if you will. So the idea is the danger room, it could be anything. And that's part of the point of RPG as therapy, is that we can tell any story, and we're probably going to say story like 8 million times today, right? But the idea is we can set up any challenge, we can set up any kind of scenario, any kind of scene, any kind of portrayal. And we're just kind of watching as we watch our young students, at the Gifted Mansion, going through and seeing how they respond and how they react, and we tweak them as we go by. And so using it in this manner, we have a lot of opportunity, and sometimes the game that we choose is going to be very important. So again, like we said at the beginning, we're not admonishing, or we're not saying that D&D isn't a good system for therapeutic RPG. We're just saying that there's a lot of things to consider if you're a practitioner and you're using RPG about what system you choose. Personally, I'm not a big Tolkien fantasy guy. Like, that's not my jam. My jam is sci-fi. My jam is horror. So to run therapeutic RPG for me with fantasy, you wouldn't really get me. You wouldn't really get a lot of immersion for me or a lot of investment, because that's not my property. But as we're going to talk about some other things, picking a game system. James.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of RPGs available, and a couple of things that we consider when we're picking a particular system for a game, for a group that we're running. We want to look at like the complexity of the rules system. There are some groups that are very much into a crunchy rules system, something that's like granola consistency, that just has all sorts of math that you have to do and comes with a slide ruler inside the box, or comes with the chance that your character is going to die during character creation. Thanks, Traveler. There's all sorts of things to think about and consider when you're doing this, right? So we tend to err toward systems that are lighter on rules. Not that there are no rules, but that the rules are very digestible. They're easy to pick up. You want to be able to have options so that you can not just present like, this is what we're doing to the group, because you want the group to feel invested. So one of the things that we like to do is we like to pick a couple of systems that we could run the same story in, based on a genre choice. So I pre-mentioned fantasy. We might ask them, like, okay, we have D&D, we have Pathfinder, and we have Pugmire. We can do any of these systems. Which one do you guys want to play with? So we know which one we're going to be selecting. And maybe they want to play humans, maybe they want to play anthropomorphic dogs. Who knows? So you want to have options. Now, running what you know is really important, obviously, because you're going to be running it, which means you need to know what's going on with the game. If you don't know it, you want to run something that you can effectively learn. And then also making sure that you're ultimately running what your group is looking for. If your group wants to work on a collection of like teamwork exercises, don't pick Wraith, right? Because that's just one player and somebody whispering over their shoulder telling them to do terrible things most of the time. Like, that's all you're gonna get. There's no teamwork there, right? So make sure you're picking something that fits all of your needs, that's digestible, something that you know or that you can learn effectively to be able to teach other people. Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I was just saying, as we go through this, I mean, this is not, kind of like T.S. Eliot's, the naming of cats is a difficult matter. The picking of systems is equally a difficult matter because we want to make sure that there are a lot of things to consider, not only from the facilitator perspective, but also from the player perspective when you're talking about this. And sometimes not even just the player, like if you're running for children, you might have to consider the parent perspective as well. Maybe the parent doesn't want, I mean, yes, I understand it's 2020. We should have long been past the satanic panic thinking, but you'd be surprised about how many folks ask about, well, are you playing the devil game with my kids? So, a lot of people, when you say fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons, spells, people shut that conversation down. So you go, oh, no, 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 hold on. We have a game. It's called Meddling Kids, and it's where you get to make your own Scooby-Doo mystery crew because everybody loves Scooby, and it's not really a ghost or a demon. It's actually, just some old guy with an amusement park that wants money, and he's just wearing a suit. So in talking through picking a game system, these, we're not going to go through each and every one of these, so I strongly kind of advise, if you're at your PC or whatever, take some screenshots of this information, or email us at the end with the contact info, because a lot of these considerations are things we do when we do our consultation. We talk through who your group is going to be for, what your group is going to be about, what considerations you might have. I mean, one, the maturity level of the content. There's a lot of systems out there. I mean, talking about some Power by the Apocalypse engine stuff, running a game in Monster Hearts versus a game in Monster of the Week. Similar theme, but definitely one of them offers itself a little bit more. Like, I wouldn't run Monster Hearts for a bunch of 10-year-olds. It's not really advisable due to some of the nature of the content that you can get into. So you really have to look at as many facets as you can. And this is all about setting the stage for making sure that that group is going to be an effective experience for people. Also, that is going to be as smooth as possible. So when we talk about things down further on the list, like ease of access of the developmental level of the player, or the flexibility of player agencies, some games may limit player choice. Rules light stuff, like James was, kind of denoting earlier, a lot of those systems allow for more player flexibility. So that's going to help. Maybe if you're working on self-esteem, or maybe if you're working on choice and consequence with people, or self-advocacy, having a player have more ability to affect change in their environment, that's going to be a heavy consideration for you, because you want to give the player more of what's going to be beneficial when we talk about what their goal acquisition is. Either of you guys have anything to add on to that before we go to the next one?
You may continue, Jack. I feel like
Oh,
you did
Yeah.
an excellent job of covering the information on that slide.
oh, you've worked on my goal of self-esteem and expression and advocacy. Thank you.
It's like we've worked together.
Yeah, this man whom I've never met before. So again, either one of you guys could take this one, as I'm just talking about just mechanics. So that's one consideration, right, James?
Oh, it's yeah, it's a significant amount of consideration. So mechanics, I don't know how that happened. There we go. Yeah, what we call the crunchy bits, right? So we try to use the rules to sort of reflect maybe some of the things that we're trying to do within a therapeutic session. So the example that we have here, failed roles teaching resilience. So if you have a group that, like, say they want to learn how to adapt to, like, ever-changing circumstances, right? So the idea of just any game that has dice in it gives that randomness to the system, where they roll something and they don't know if they're going to succeed or fail, and they really can't make a plan until it happens, and then they have to respond to said thing. Another example, one of the groups that we run, I run a Deadlands campaign, which I would have never thought of Deadlands as something that I would run therapeutically. It does not seem like a therapeutic system at all. But in thinking about the system of Deadlands, it incorporates the idea of an overall aura of fear in an area that players can actively attempt to dissipate, or by their own actions accelerate as well. So one of the facilitators for one of the groups that we run thought that it sounded compelling to use this system to teach the kids crisis management. And the idea that the way that I presented it is it's not just about going out and punching the thing until the thing stops moving and then coming back with the severed head of said thing and being like, here, killed your monster. Because sometimes then the town goes, oh my God, it really did exist. Ah! You know, and all of a sudden you've caused so much more panic because now you've actually just confirmed that there are monsters out there. So like sometimes you have to be careful about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And Deadlands turns out to be a great system for that. So I had never thought of the rules mechanics actually being therapeutic for it. Turns out it's actually pretty darn good. You know, so that was surprising. So the rules themselves, are they compelling enough that you know, they can pull the player into the game? Are there neat or interesting mechanics that will allow you to, aside from the story, kind of immerse the players in the things that you're doing at the table, as well as the story that you're telling and the characters that you're creating? We do a lot of discussion when we pick systems about rules heavy or rules light. And we mentioned this a couple slides ago, but some systems we would really like to use. Like, for example, I have a lot of fun playing Shadowrun. I'm sure other people have had a lot of fun playing Shadowrun. Shadowrun's a fun system. Who doesn't want to play as a giant troll samurai that gets 14 six-sided dice in your hand and you just roll them across the table and turn something into soup? That's so fun, right? But Shadowrun, not really therapeutic because there's so many rules for everything, right? Like, we're not going to use the old Palladium system for rifts. It's not going to happen.
Hey, bro, I heard you like charts, so I put some charts in your charts.
Yeah, so the chart's on page 38, bro. Charts. Right, so there are some systems that are whole. That's an awesome one. God, that's such a great read. Like, the book itself is so good. It's such a fun read for the rule system. And then I got through the book and I went, I don't actually remember how to play this because the read was just so fun. Like, I didn't retain any of the rules now. You don't want to pick anything that's going to limit their choices as players, unless you do. You know, maybe there's something that you have a bunch of new players. They've never done an RPG before, and some people can get that analysis paralysis issue where you start giving them, you know, unlimited choices. They're like, well, what can I do? Yes. Okay, but what can I do? Yeah. What do you want to do? And then they go, you know, there's some systems like Powered by the Apocalypse Engine where they give you playbooks for the characters that you can pick. And then as they give you the playbooks, each of those playbooks has a list of like, here's the moves and the things that you can do during the course of the game. Now, it is limited in these are the things you can do, but a lot of it is up to the interpretation during the game of running those actions of how they actually play out, giving the variety in the game. So that's some of my stuff about rules.
So, I mean, kind of further talking a little bit about, you know, mechanics, some rule systems, you know, and again, some of this is stuff that, you know, James kind of said, but to put a finer point on it, you know, too many rules sometimes are like, a lot of folks will ask us the question of, well, aren't you afraid that this player is going to like over-identify with their character, or, you know, they're going to get too deeply invested, you know, and we sometimes ask the question like, well, the first question is, have you ever played a role-playing game? And a lot of folks who ask that question go, well, not really. And I go, well, there's a lot of fourth wall breaking in games where, you know, you have to ask for initiative, you have to ask for combat rolls, you have to ask, you know, what is your character doing? So to some degree, that's good because it helps us kind of, you know, ground the group and let people know that, you know, this is this is an activity. It's not real life. But on the second hand, I mean, if you get too many rules in a system and you're getting broke down into that minutia, it kind of can break down the pacing, especially for therapeutic intent. You know, you're trying to tell this story, and a lot of the Bodhana model really involves about the concept of bleed and how much of, you know, what the character is working on is what what the player is working on, and how much of what the player is, you know, bleeds into that character identity. So if you have too many rules, sometimes you spend more times in a rule book than you do on the person. And that can be a detriment with some systems. So to some degree, even if it's like a kid's version of D&D, there can be a lot of rules in that system, which is why a lot of our preference is to try to go again with like rules light. And again, towards the end of the presentation, we're actually going to go over like about, I think it's like 8 to 10 systems that had certain aspects. So it's going to kind of highlight through example of like what you can really find to be able to utilize. I mean, it's always about your player comfort. It's also about, does everything make sense to what you want to portray? If you have a lot of, you know, car chases, or if you're going to put sanity into your game, what system do you want to use? I mean, Call of Cthulhu gets a lot of heat for the way that they, you know, look at sanity, whereas, you know, other systems have things for sanity. There's cyber psychosis and cyberpunk. I mean, there's a ton of different systems that kind of immerse this. I know MASH.
It can even be broken down into something not even labeled as sanity, but take Conan, the Conan Adventures in Modifi.
Yep.
Conan Adventures has a physical damage area and then a mental damage area called Resolve. And either of those two things can be attacked during the course of a game, but that Resolve score kind of is your character's like mental capacity. It's mental fortitude for things. And the lower your Resolve goes, the less able you are to mentally handle the stress or the rigors or whatever it is that you're doing. It's difficult to think in Conan that you can like mental someone to death, but it's totally possible to just leave them lying there crying.
You've been mentaled. So here are some popular mechanics. Tee-hee. No, I chose these mainly because I'm waiting for my flying car and my robot to decorate my Christmas tree. But seriously, these, you know, we're not going to go into extravagant detail on all these, but let's just kind of for a moment, you know, look at some of the ideas of different mechanics. So some games have dice pools. Those might be easier for someone than, you know, the aforementioned slide rule that you have to do. You know, for some people, the amount of dice that you have may correlate to I'm better at this thing. So even the visual component of something like a dice pool mechanic for resolution could in and of itself lead the way to other therapeutic conversations. In another presentation, we talk extensively about, actually it's the one we're doing tomorrow at 1, we talk about the character sheet, and alignment is a big part of that conversation because alignment, again, a very much discussed and argued topic in RPG therapy, that's a mechanic that can help lead the way for moral discussion, you know?
Yeah, alignment is so subjective. Like to everybody, if I asked everybody here, each person, and one of the examples that we use is somebody has like a charisma score of 18. Like, let's go to D&D for a second. And most of us will laugh at a charisma score of 18 because when we were kids and we got an 18 charisma, the last thing you put that 18 in, right? But charisma, if you're playing a charismatic person, what does that look like to you? Like, how do you denote a charismatic person? How do you picture somebody that is true neutral? Like, how do you play Switzerland? What do you decide is neutral? What do you decide is evil or good? You know, these things kind of get blurred almost by the person. So alignment becomes something that's very interesting on a sheet to see people's interpretations of what they view as lawful or neutral or chaotic or good or evil or indifferent, you know, or whatever the case might be. Yeah. Movement's another mechanic that's kind of nebulous. Right now, with things being the way that they are, movement is not a thing that we really have any care in dealing with. Like, am I close enough to hit that guy? Yeah, you could be. You know, there's really like, we don't use map stuff online. A lot of this is theater of mind for our groups right now. So maps and minis and movement rules. We try to keep that stuff as light and as fluid as possible to allow for flexibility during action so that people can kind of do what they want to do within reason um, in the time
And,
that a round takes.
yeah, and in general, the whole point to including some of these as considerations, and again, encouraging folks, screenshot what you want, or zing out to us for, talk about this. But you always remember, we had that earlier slide talking about what considerations that we make when we're identifying or analyzing a system. We get a lot of games and we have a lot of considerations because there's new systems coming out all the time. There's, systems with very unique themes and very, just different aspects of them. And as we consider the game, we always consider the client, and we always even consider the potential client, because I mean, mechanics, you want to identify each of these lenses in the light of the people that you're going to be running that group for, because this is not the only consideration. We also have another big consideration for systems, which is the theme or setting that is immersed. And James alluded to this earlier when we were talking specifically about Deadlands, being kind of a horror setting, but sometimes the game that you pick has a better opportunity to develop the atmosphere that you're going for, or that setting that is going to give you desired situations to explore with those folks. So science fiction versus horror versus superhero. There are certain stories I can tell in a superhero setting that maybe horror isn't the right fit for. Are we talking about a small intimate setting versus a large? We talked about Shadowrun earlier. Shadowrun in its scope could be world-changing events. Well, we ran actually a therapeutic group for a little while using Shadowrun, and we did the entire adventure in a 4-block radius. So they created their neighbors and their friends and all the people in their town. So all of the stories, nothing was epic. It was even less than city-based. Like, this wasn't even the entire city. This was a neighborhood, which kind of reflected, the adolescents that we were running the group for. That's your world, is your block, your neighborhood, until you expand it. So now when that neighbor's grandson is the one that's trying to get into the Halloweeners street gang, it's a little bit easier than, we just beat the heck out of him so the gang doesn't happen. Yeah, but that's Mrs. Melendez's grandson. And that she would be heartbroken if something bad happened to her boy, or, oh my God, even if she found out that he was in a gang, it would break her heart. So we got to tell more emotionally impactful stories, even within the paradigm of that sci-fi setting. So theme, as we've said before, greatly increases immersion. What you're creating around that table and the experience that those people are going to have definitely helps with the investment of people into their character and what's going on in that event and in that story. So if you can find a theme that matches more perfectly, and one of the things that we've kind of talked about, we run a lot of kids on bikes, which is one of the systems we're going to talk about later. And one of the interesting things in one of our groups is a grant-funded group for adolescents who are on the autism spectrum. And one of the fascinating things that we've seen is, like, we've set up this whole town of weird, right? Where all these weird things are happening and they're like investigating conspiracies. They're having more fun role-playing moments, like when the parents are like, hey, where you been for the last couple of days? Are you okay? Like, and they literally had like an ABC after school special kind of moment where, like, mom and dad are sitting there on the couch and it's the 80s. So they're like, we know what's going on. And the kids are like, oh my God, they know about the government conspiracy. They know about this stuff. And, we saw that Nancy Reagan episode of Different Strokes. Are you on the dope? Like, and the kids, bear in mind, these are like, young kids. They weren't alive when Different Strokes was on the air, but they're really embracing that aspect of real life, because we've had people go, was it kind of weird you're playing this game where you want to escape and you want to get away? And I'm like, I don't know. These kids are really zinging into playing the real life stuff that's happening to their characters as opposed to the fantasy. It's weird.
And they really do react the same way the kids would react to their parents asking them that question, like, son, are you on the dope? And the kid's like, Dad, come on. No, not on. It's so good. Like just to
Oh,
yeah.
it's amazing. And think of it in this way. We do want to give the level of choice, and in other presentations we talk a lot about like really presenting what consequences are and how, you know, consequences impact the story. But having a theme or a setting that really wraps around the confines of that system in a way gives you walls to the sandbox. Because let's be honest, you kind of can and can't do everything that you want to do in a role-playing game. In one of the games that we run on Saturday, we introduced one of the kids to the system, and he was like, all right, so here's my character. I want him to be like this sword mage kind of deal, and like he swings his sword and like he splits the air and it turns into like cloud blades that fire off into my enemies. And like me and Max are sitting there and like, all right, so let's explain level 1 and
That's
how that
something to
kind of
aspire to.
yeah, exactly. So, you know, there is some reality to this that, you know, the theme definitely helps, and theme gives us a couple of other things as well. Max, do you want to take this one now that I've asked you opportunistically while you're drinking soda?
Perfect timing. No, as it says, it provides a foundation for the world in the game, especially when you're talking about existing properties. You know, for people who don't know about D&D, they probably have seen Lord of the Rings, so you can give them a general explanation of D&D as being similar to Lord of the Rings, and they already have a general idea of what they're dealing with. Same thing with Stranger Things. A lot of the time, or I'm sorry, Kids on Bikes. I often discuss that as Stranger Things, the role-playing game. Again, give them the idea of the borders or boundaries of what to expect, and then discussing, you know, Star Wars, Star Trek, things along those lines. And I think one of the most important aspects to consider is the player's interest. Like Jack mentioned earlier, he's not that big into fantasy. So if he was a person who's coming to my group and he's like, yeah, Lord of the Rings doesn't do it for me, but you know what? I love the Goonies. I was like, all right, well, I got a game for you. You know, that's you have to consider it that way. And honestly, for me, I'm kind of the opposite of Jack. I love fantasy. Sci-fi, iffy to me. It has to be a really good sci-fi story to catch me. So everyone's different. Everyone has different interests and things along those lines, and you have to keep that into consideration when you're forming your groups and when you address what to play.
Yeah, and even the use of a lot of those themes, you know, is well represented as something like, you know, because you use the example of, you know, pretty similar scenes, you know, about, you know, 30 years apart almost. Well, actually, yeah, but over 30 years, where, you know, Goonies and Stranger Things, you know, that whole idea of tropes that we find, you know, whether it's like the jokey character. And again, Kids on Bikes is one example of a system that does this very well. And we'll talk about how tropes can be used therapeutically. But let's think about things that we like and things of why we like that. That trope, that stereotype, that image, that's a character archetype. Those are people that we see in our real life. We can talk about, you know, a character like Chunk or Mouth from, you know, the Goonies, and we're like, well, who do I know that's a Mouth? You know, who do I know that's like the quippy sidekick? Well, that's the funny sidekick. That's a trope in Kids on Bikes. And we can use these even further through that scene to explore identity, to explore perception. So another big aspect that we're definitely going to hit a lot on is resolution. So rock, paper, scissors, you know, thank you, regular show. But resolution is very important because part of the goal of therapeutic role playing, especially with a lot of the work we do with children and teens, we also work with adults, is that whole idea of teaching how to deal with situations. Like we're looking at how we handle things around the table and how that can correlate to real life. One of the taglines of Bodhana is the Bodhana Group, bringing characters to life, because that's our goal. We want this character at the table to represent you and the struggles that you have and how you can take that away. And, you know, resolution, James, if you want to take this slide, I mean, resolution is kind of where that's the meat in the stew, right?
Yeah. So when you're trying to resolve different things during the course of your game, and I want to point out, like, probably the first one is actually diplomacy, because that one's kind of a weird one to do. There are a lot of times in the game where instead of somebody saying, I would like to roll my persuasion to convince this thing not to punch me, I'll be like, cool. What would you say to said thing to get it not to punch you? Well, I would say this. Let's try it out and see if it works.
Yeah, bold move, Cotton. Let's see how it plays out.
I will make them role play it out. I will make them actually go through the talking of that thing and working through it. And with that diplomacy discussion, or whatever it might be, persuasion, deception, whatever it is, I might even give them a bonus to their role that they would not have had they not played it out, initially. But it makes them have the conversation. Because you don't want, with resolution, if at all possible, you don't want the mechanic itself to sort of defeat the therapeutic intention that you're trying to put behind it. Don't just let them roll persuasion for diplomacy. Let them kind of talk it out a little bit if that's a skill that they need to work on. That ever-changing series of circumstances, resilience. Nothing swings a situation more than failing a saving throw. Crap. I'm poisoned. I am slowly dying now. Like, well, now we got to figure out something else. Creative thinking and critical thinking, when you're talking about resolving situations and players are being creative about something, or they're coming up with a solution that you didn't expect them to come up with, whatever the case might be, you don't necessarily need die rolls all the time to determine that stuff. Sometimes they can come up with a cool creative idea and you want them to feel successful and you want them to feel like their idea worked. And if conceptually you're like, yeah, they could probably do that. Just let them do it. Narrate it, go through the thing. You don't always need to roll a die. So that's just a couple thoughts on resolution type stuff.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jack.
No, you go ahead, Max.
I adore failure. Failure in the game is so amazing, and sadly Yoda has now taken my steam and saying failure is the greatest teacher, or greatest teacher failure is.
Spoken like a real GM.
Yeah. And I love systems. Thank you, Evan. I love systems that address that. For example, Powered by the Apocalypse, one of the ways you gain experience is by failing a die roll. It's a mechanical way of showing learning from failing. I adore that. And the Gradient Success, another game that I enjoy, not necessarily great for a therapeutic situation, but is the Fantasy Flight Star Wars. That has two different axes to consider. There's the success failure, and then the advantage disadvantage aspect. So you could fail something, but in a decent way. A good outcome can come from it. Or you could succeed, but it costs you something. I enjoy that. It's very crunchy, but it's good.
Yeah, and it fits well into this idea on the slide, before we go into, some of our recommendations of some systems where we'll kind of highlight a couple of games that we've used and we've explored. It's another opportunity for this is narrative exploration of cause and effect. So saying that your character moves forward in terms of failure, sometimes it's more important to express with the person or discuss with the person about it's kind of like method role playing as opposed to like method action of like, what's your character's motivation for this scene? What were you looking to accomplish?
You have to say it like that too.
Oh, absolutely. I sound like I'm teaching a Bly workshop, but and look it up, kids, or ask your parents, especially if they've done theater. So the whole nature of cause and effect is that's how we as humans process what our paradigm of actions or available choices are. We look at, well, if I do this, this might happen, this might happen, this might happen. Well, a lot of times succeeding is like, okay, I did the thing. Well, that moves the story forward. Well, I didn't do the thing. That should always move the story forward, because it's a natural form of every action has a consequence. And consequence, especially from a behavioral standpoint, consequence has been so maligned as a word, it's not even funny. That's why I'm not laughing. Consequence just means a thing happened in response. That's all a consequence is. So I tipped well, next time I get great service. That's a consequence. We're able to role play resolutions narratively to help people with that chain of thinking. It's a therapeutic exercise where we discuss antecedent behavior and consequence. That's cognitive behavioral therapy. That's a very fine underpinning to this model. I mean, RPG therapy is not a unique approach. It is the beef stew of therapeutic tool sets that we can do all kinds of different therapeutic exercises and activities through the vestige of the story. That's why this model is so versatile. I can do DBT, I could do rational and motor behavioral, I got all these wonderful things. So now, to hopefully the moment you've all been waiting for, and the joke that I'm hoping at least at some point lands during one of these presentations, we're going to talk about a few good systems. You're damn right I ordered the red box. And I can't gauge the crowd, James. I just realized the folly of this. I can't hear people laughing or not laughing, so I have automatically
It would be the same reaction either way. I can see Brent Harris holding his head, like clearly needs some Excedrin. Brennan,
oh no, I got a face palm
probably
on it.
Not all that. Yeah, guys, it fell flat again.
It fell. Okay, most people, but in the movie he said, "You're damn right. I ordered the code red." So I figured the red box, and it would be like a thing, and I've already taken too much time to explain it. But the point is we are now going to showcase a couple of good role-playing game systems for you to consider if you are a clinician or a practitioner who's looking to use these games with therapeutic or clinical intentionality. There is also the option that you may be a parent who wants to run some good developmental games for your child. That's a perfectly great use for this as well. You can tell, as we've said, you can tell good moral stories. You can tell good, like, lesson-based stories that are not, quote unquote, clinical in an application, but Aesop's fairy tales. It's just we use dice. It's a good way to learn lessons. So the first of our wonderful systems is actually one of the first ones that the Bodhana group started using therapeutically, and this is No Thank You Evil. It's a game that is designed by Shauna Germain, published by Monty Cook Games. So beautiful system. You literally can create anything. The template is wizard. Are you a bubble wizard? Are you an air wizard? Are you a rock guitar wizard? You could be a cake wizard if you wanted to be, as long as the kid thinks it's fun and explores it. Go with it. So it's a beautiful system because it can be played for kids as young as 5. So it's a very easy system, not only for kids to learn to play, but also kids can very easily run it. It's basically it's a Numenera Junior. You have a difficulty rating that's up to 6. You roll 1 die to resolve. You could spend tokens that you could see like in the picture here. So you can not only help yourself, but you can also help a buddy, because that's using your Be Awesome token. Now, some deeper level, the character sheets actually have been designed. There are 3 different character sheets, and they are basically designed for people of varying either age level or developmental level. So the very simple thing is my character is a blank. Let's say I'm a little kid who's 5. My character is a pirate. Well, what does that mean? I don't know. The kid's 5. It's whatever the heck he wants it to mean. It's whatever the player wants to portray. So it gives a simple intro all the way up to your character is a blank blank who blanks. So now we have a adjective, a noun, and a verb. So I'm a quick wizard who likes ice cream. Well, in the play of the game, quick wizard means I get bonuses to my speed. Well, ice cream, who knows what that means? Maybe I, send out bolts of ice cream, scoops, and they freeze my enemies. Or maybe I, like envision that I give an enemy an ice cream headache. You know, these are creative things that kids can be allowed to explore, that boundless creativity, which much like play therapy, will give the person that sense of freedom. And you usually can get a lot of very good injected content.
Worlds are also really fun and like not
Oh, yeah.
super defined for GMs to have a lot of flexibility when running it. It basically takes the world as a kid would see it from their bed. You know, so
Yeah.
they have a bookshelf with books on it, so that's like the storybook world.
Yep.
You know, where the characters in their stories they can run into and meet and have adventures with. If they look out their window, they see the back lawn. So there's this like vast wilderness out there that can be explored. That, you know, who knows what's out there. The scary world is under the kid's bed. You know, so that's where all the monsters and the scary things live. So it gives this whole map and labels everything in world names, but the worlds are just basically thematically designed off of very basic concepts that a kid would have sitting on their bed, creatively or imaginatively thinking about the world around them.
Yeah. So, Max, let's take us to Pugmire.
Pugmire. You can play as an anthropomorphic dog, or now with Monarchies of Mal, you can even do cats.
And actually upcoming soon is Pirates of Pugmire, so now you can take your adventures to the high seas. Arr.
Narratively, it's based on our world. However, man is gone, and some dogs and cats have been what they call uplifted, become anthropomorphic. So it's based in our world, so there's a little bit of familiarity involved, but it's also a little bit of mystery, because what happened to man? A great way of starting into this is thinking about your dog or cat, or one that you've had, or a familiar dog and cat, and try to emulate that. So it is an easy way of trying to learn role playing, because a lot of the time you can be thinking, well, what would Oliver be like? And it creates and by not going into tropes, it creates a way of familiarity to create a persona that you can try to replicate. The Code of Man discusses moral principles. The general principle is that you are trying to be a good dog, and there is a list of things that good dogs do.
Always fetch what has been left behind, always protect others from the unseen, which of course, you know, anyone who has a dog is kind of like, what the heck are you barking at? There's nothing there. The dog knows it is the unseen, and you should give him a biscuit.
So it creates kind of a lighthearted, tongue-in-cheek code of morality to discuss. The layered characters provide the emotional safety. Also, another good benefit of Pugmire is that it's based on D&D 5e SRD. So for players who have played D&D, the rules are going to seem very familiar to them.
Yeah.
So it is a good first step away from D&D if somebody wants to explore something new. I know that's how we handled it in our Saturday group. Is people wanted the one player was very familiar with D&D, the other one was interested, so we're like, hey, let's start with Pugmire then, because it's not going to be that hard for the one player to be stepping into, and it's no more difficult.
And Pugmire, of course, if you are interested in checking out more about that, this game was designed by Eddie Webb and is published through Onyx Path Publishing. Eddie has been a frequent guest of ours at Save Against Fear each year that, you know, since we started getting special guests. And again, like we said, there's Monarchies of Mal, which is the cat kingdom. So while the dogs are be a good dog, cats are all about who is best, who is dominant. So it's a great system.
As a quick aside, Jack Barton, I see a couple people have had to step out. If for some reason you need to leave and your question has not been answered, please send us an email and we can address your question one-on-one if need be.
Yeah, you can find, actually, if you have to leave early, our website is contained inside of the event description, so you can find it there. Thanks, Max. Very good point. So our next system, we've kind of talked about it a little bit, kids on bikes. I don't know, James, if you want to talk about maybe what we haven't covered, because we have a bunch of systems, but go ahead.
Yeah, so kids on bikes is one that we're using fairly regularly right now. We are also actually, like, obviously I won't be able to get into any of the details of it, but we are involved in a grant-funded research study for the effects of RPGs on folks with social anxiety. So we are actually using kids on bikes for this research study. Some of the things we really love about this system is the fact that the world building is executed by the players. So it actually gives everybody something to latch onto right from the beginning. There's a series of questions that we've even used in other systems that are relationship questions. Each of the players picks somebody that they know and somebody that they don't know out of the people at the table. The person that they know, they decide, do I know this person from a positive or a negative interaction? The cool thing is me saying it was a negative interaction doesn't mean that I hate this person, that I'm never going to associate with this person. It could very much set up something that was a complete misunderstanding between the two characters. Sometimes it leads to a really fun anecdote. The youngest person in the group was victimized by the bully in the group. And during character creation, they decided that the bully knew the youngest kid because the bully had shoved them in a locker once. The bully doesn't necessarily remember shoving this kid into a locker. The kid remembers.
Yeah.
Right? Like that was something that was established before the game even started. You know, so players start coming up with things that tie their characters together, which then starts adding to personality quirks and things that can be played out in the interaction of those characters. They develop landmarks in the town, important people in the town, and then each of them has to fuel the town with some sort of rumor, whether it's true or not. There's somebody sleeping in the basement of the department store. They've been finding, like, you know, old blankets and there's some things missing. So there's rumor that somebody's been staying there. Alligators in the sewer. Weird clowns handing out balloons on the corner. You know, whatever the case might be. Are those rumors true? Kids have no idea. The players come up with the rumors. It's up to the GM to decide if they're going to tackle those rumors or not, do something different. But as your players are creating this world, all you get to do is step back, take notes, and be like, yep, I'm going to hit him with that later. Oh, that's a good one. Oh, everybody hates the principal. All right. You know, so that's really cool. The character creation is really simple. All of the stats already come pre-generated on the character. You're just picking a stereotype of whether you're playing the brutish jock or the plastic beauty queen or the funny sidekick, reluctant hero. There's a couple of adult roles that you can take on if somebody wants to play one of the adults in the group, because sometimes there's a sheriff or a blue-collar worker or some sort of other adult character that gets mixed up in these crazy kids' adventures. The most unique thing about it is the superpowered ally, which is their ET, their 11, their sloth. So it is a superpowered character of some type that has some type of ability that is beyond the normal. Each of the players gets dealt a couple of cards out of a deck of cards. These cards are both powers and personality quirks. Personality quirks can be things like thinks that one of the players is the chosen one, does not understand social cues. So as the players are going and they get introduced to this character, individual players have the cards in front of them. Nobody else can see them. That player then plays the card on the table and develops the superpowered character as you go. So somebody adds, does not understand social cues. Well, during the course of the game, the person that has that card in front of them, if the superpowered ally is interacting with them and the superpowered ally doesn't understand social cues, the player that played that card actually now role plays that part of the superpowered ally's personality. So they can jump into the shoes of this NPC if they're not involved in the scene, just to kind of keep everybody involved at the table. Anybody can play that ally, including the GM.
Yeah, and
Which is
just
a pretty creative thing. So.
Oh yeah. So I mean, Kids on Bikes is through Renegade Game Studios, developed by Doug Lewandowski and John Gilmore. They also have, if you are maybe not a Goonies Stranger Things person, they also have Teens in Space, which is a sci-fi where the superpower character is now the ship that you all take part in creating, and just recently released Kids on Brooms, which is a Harry Potter-esque wizarding school setting, which actually adds magic, but does not utilize the powered character, because technically with magic, you're kind of your own powered character. And that has a whole host of other bennies, and we can't wait to drop that to the table.
Yep.
So, all right. A couple other ones here, because we want to make sure to allow some time for questions from the group. So next system we have here is called Dread. For those of you who are not familiar with Dread, Dread is a very unique system. It uses a Jenga tower and block pulls for its resolution mechanic. So the way that Dread, you can literally tell any story. It could be anything from, you're trying to be a sniper taking out, a hostage crisis. You could be, telling a very deep, emotionally resonant story by developing questionnaires that the characters are asking certain questions. Now, one of the cool aspects of it is that there's a natural tension from the resolution mechanic of pulling blocks. So if you're trying to work maybe with working with anxiety or dealing with that feeling of fear and anxiety, that tower is a natural way to, even if the game itself doesn't explore those themes, you could say, okay, guys, we're going to do this adventure, and you might feel a little bit of tension as we go through resolving. So feel your body's tension, learn how your body expresses that anxiety. Then everybody's going to have some coping skills before we get started. So let's see how effective those were for us in the middle of that situation. So there's some very creative use that we could do. And there's also a very direct risk reward mechanic in that if you're pulling 7 blocks, I don't think it's going to go too well for you. Just saying. Who knows? You may have mutant powers of levitation and, telekinesis, which might help you. But Jenga, very phenomenal system that that you could add to your array. Another wonderful favorite, and I'm sure James might weigh in on this one as well. I love RetroStar. RetroStar is an indie title. It's put out by Spectrum Games, main developer Barack Blackburn, who is another great friend of ours, also a member of the Bodhana Board of Directors. So RetroStar emulates 70s bad sci-fi. And I say bad meaning good. So it could be Battlestar Galactica, it could be Buck Rogers, it could be any of these old, it could even be movies like Star Wars or any number of Italian sci-fi movies that were filmed in an area that inexplicably looked like California.
The two sessions that we've played so far, well, we've played several, but the two that popped to me immediately are a 70s version of Galaxy Truckers. Where we were all like long haul smugglers that all had like pickup truck style ships. And then another one that we played that Jack ran for us was a one shot that was a love boat in space. But the boat was a repurposed military carrier. So some of the personnel were like held over military personnel. I played a droid that was a combat protocol droid that had his personality rewritten so many times that I developed a random table of personalities, and on each day I would roll from the table, tell Jack what my result was, and that was the character I played for that particular day. So you can do all kinds of really cool stuff with it, and the system itself is created in such a way that it emulates the actual running of the show. It's 5 acts. Each act has 12 actions, meaning that you guys can role play stuff out. You can talk at the table. You can get into characters. When somebody picks up a die and has to roll something, that is one of your 12 actions for that act. So like those TV shows, give 45 minutes with commercials for an hour show. The action's going to keep moving. right? So the story kind of keeps moving. It allows for like a quicker pace of storytelling. There's plenty of cool, like, special effects points that you can just decide, like, to spend a special effects point, and like, I want to use my built-in X-ray scanner. So like I spend my special effects point and like and like you describe like the cheap green mint light that goes over the thing, and how it, like, it's all distorted, and I do the X-ray scan and I get a thing because I used this special effects point. You can make it as cheesy as you want, as serious as you want. The rules behave the same way regardless of theme or mood of the game, which I really appreciate, because if you're trying to tell varied types of stories, sometimes the rules can get in the way of that, because the rules are like, no, this is a comedy game, and for this it's just, no, this is, pardon my French, this is shitty sci-fi. So like, this is the way that we're going to use this system to tell like terrible sci-fi stories. Like really fun, at the same time. So that's, I've had nothing but great experiences playing in this system.
And they actually call it the intention system because, earlier, whereas in D&D or more traditional systems, I'm going to do a lockpick kit skill or a computer skill roll. In RetroStar, it literally is, well, what's your character trying to do? What's their goal? What's their intention by doing what they're doing? Because the system very much runs on narrative failure. You basically have a total number of dice that you get to roll, and they're all six-siders. And basically, whether you're taking the two worst or the two best rolls depends on how much advantage or disadvantage you have in that situation. So based on that roll, it very much operates on, a lot of games use the whole seed control mechanic if you roll kind of like down the middle. But the whole idea of then you narrate your failure. You keep control and say, well, this is, I fail, but this is what happens. Or I succeed, then the GM tells you what happens. It's a very great way to play upon that failure forward idea that we've talked about in a lot of systems.
Another nice thing about this, and then we can probably move to the next thing, is just that this system, if you have players at the table, or you have players that you're trying to work with their initiative, their ability to get themselves involved in something. We've had several players in our groups that have said that they wanted to work on their assertiveness because they're not very outspoken or assertive. If you have a character or a player that is kind of a wallflower and doesn't directly get involved with the action, kind of lets other people around them get involved with the action, this game is going to force them to do something, because the player action is what forces the game to move forward. So everybody has to do stuff, and it puts everybody with about an equal amount of time in the spotlight. Because somebody's doing something, other people are still on camera, right? So nobody's, even if you're an extra, you're doing something, so it forces everybody to kind of push the story forward. And nobody can really wallflower effectively because they're just not going to have any fun in the system at all, because it does force you to do stuff.
Yep. So a couple other examples. We're coming close to when we're going to break for questions here. So we'll cover a couple of the other systems. So Pendragon, which is, role playing in the time of Arthurian legend. Main thing that we talk about a lot here is with traits and passions are used for stats in this system. And one of the creative ways that they do this is it's not, well, I have a 16 in this and a blah, blah, blah. It's actually, and the example we use here is chaste/lustful. That's one stat, but the way you split it is you have a total number of 20. So maybe I'm 17 chaste, which means I'm 3 lustful, which provides a little bit more of an intuitive discussion-based, about what your traits are and how you define yourself. There's a lot of interpretation to, well, what does 3 lustful mean? What prompts your character to, does it have to be a real extreme situation? Is it, is it lustful for all people? Are you particularly enamored of one person? So when we talk about that paradigm of what the character's skill basis is, you're able to define these things, violent versus peaceful, I think is another one. So you're able to discuss the fact that, this goes back to our alignment discussion. No one is always ever chaotically evil. No one is always ever neutral. We define ourselves as who we are, given where we are and what the context of our situation is. So it's a very fluid mechanic choice that allows for a lot of that interpretation of who are you and what would you do given a certain situation. I can tell you I would never steal, but at this point, I haven't really been in a situation where maybe I would have to steal to eat. So I don't know what I would do given a difficult situation. And it's very wonderful that this game, just in its basic traits and passions, allows a way to explore that. So one of our next systems, again, I'm sorry if it appears rushy, is Golden Sky Stories. And one of the most unique things about this system, which you play as Henge, which are animal spirits who are interacting with humans. It's very anime kind of theme. It's actually a system that was transported over from Japan. And one of the cool things about this is this system has non-violent resolution. There is no combat in this system. So your adventure might be, oh my God, Mother Robin's nest fell out of the tree and the guy who's mowing his lawn today doesn't see the nest. So you're kind of charged with trying to help rescue, these babies and maybe get the eggs back to the nest, but you're all spirits, so you can't be seen by the guy because, he might go after you and kidnap you or capture you. So another big focus of the story is the importance of relationships as your currency. So it's how you connect to other people. That's the level of power that you get in the system to be able to do any kind of action. So again, another incredibly inventive system. Meddling Kids, I kind of alluded to earlier. It's your own Scooby-Doo mystery crew. Some of the weird, cool parts about this is that, you're exploring archetypes, but now in a more basic role. You're the jock, the fluff, the brain of the goof, or the Fred, the Daphne, the Velma, and the Shaggy. And then the players all create a GM controlled wild card who is like your talking anthropomorphic whatever, be it an inexplicable Civil War ghost who talks like Snagglepuss, or some, that's the Gentleman Ghost. Sorry, it's an actual character from Hanna-Barbera. But they also have a trap mechanic where you build the kooky Rube Goldberg device to capture the ghost. Creative thinking. So it's a very nice, fun way to kind of create these goofy scenarios. And I think our final system is Mouse Guard, which Mouse Guard very directly is a failed forward mechanic system. There are conditions that happen when you have, failed rolls or when things in the game happen that will impact and in some ways limit the way that your character choices are available. To some people, it seems like a very, no, you must do it this way kind of a role-playing game system, but it really does kind of avoid that retry wheel spinning mechanic of you fail your lockpick. I try it again in 5 minutes. Well, you can't. Fail forward means maybe your lockpick key is broken, or maybe you damaged the lock, or maybe the time you spent there now sent an enemy, so you don't have time to pick the lock now. So again, one of the really cool things to be aware of before we kind of break into questions here is look at these systems individually and play these systems, whether it's at a local game store, whether it's with friends who, don't just want to play the same game for 30 years, whether it's a convention, whether it's a day gaming event, whatever it is, try these things out, because you're going to find that the more kind of ammo you have in your bandolier, the more therapeutic groups and the more targets and the more goals you're going to be able to connect to. And that's really what this is about. It's finding the right game for the right reasons, which is another tagline of Odana. But it's really about finding the right fit. So before we asked the crowd and Detective Columbo, excuse me if there's any questions, just one more thing. I'm going to go ahead and for everyone's interest, if you want to contact the Bodana Group, here are all the various ways that you can do that. www.thebodanagroup.org is our main website. We are also emailed at thebodanagroup@gmail.com. Facebook, the Bodhana Group, and Twitter at the Bodhana Group. We do run Save Against Fear, our annual con, which we'll be running this year over the weekend of October 9th through the 11th. It is our first year also going virtual due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you're interested in more info, I'm going to kind of show you a little bit. We do have Wizards, Warriors, and Wellness, which is our little primer that we have. It's available on Drive-Thru RPG. All proceeds directly benefit the mission of the Bodhana Group, so you can either get the PDF or the print version, but that's ways to find more about what we do. So screenshot the info. We'll probably put it up one more time, but I guess it would be a good time to kind of take down the veil of shadows, as it were. And hail, the presentation is down. So how are we doing on questions there, Sir James or Max? Do we have any good ones?
I think I got all of them.
We have a couple.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna scroll back here, and I'm gonna go to the first question that we had was from Brian McTaggart. And if I call your name, feel free to go ahead and like unmute your mic that you can talk for a minute. Is Brian here?
Yeah,
Brian
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Hey, look at that.
All right.
So Brian had asked, how do you introduce system options to players who have never played a TTRPG before?
Ooh, good question.
Yeah, I've run into this situation before where it's like, do you guys want to play a rules heavy or a rules light game? And then people look at me and have no idea what that means.
And
go
ahead, James.
I tend to err on the side of rules light if they're not sure, like, because you can ask somebody that question, and I'm sure you've run into it where you've said, you guys want to do rules heavy or rules light? And they're like, well, what's rules heavy and rules light? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, especially for that system.
I tend to go with something that has a very basic rule system at first, maybe like like Savage Worlds, which is a basic mechanic of one die and a six-sider. The six-sider is always rolled along with whatever die you roll. Unless the GM says otherwise, your difficulty is a 4. You roll those dice, take the higher of the two results. If you roll the maximum value on a die, you roll it again and add it together. And that's for every single check in the game. That's how that works. So it's a very basic system, but it's also a universal system, so it can be used for a wide range of genres and stories.
Yeah.
And if they take well to that, but they prefer a specific genre, then I might get a little more complicated with it and see what they enjoy playing.
Yeah, and part of it is gauging as you go. Like I know with our Kids on Bikes experience, you know, we in our grant funded group, we actually started running the system, and a lot of the persons who were there had no RPG experience. So we were very, very quickly astute to the fact of like saying to these folks, like, you know, we want you to play your character, role play your character. You know, we're all vets to RPGs, so we know exactly what that means. But to this kid, and it's their first RPG experience, they have no idea about their level of agency and really diving into that. So for us, I mean, looking at that system, so for us to like, okay, week 1, here's your superpower character and ally. Whoa, hold on, back the train up here. They don't even know how to role play themselves. So maybe we want to hold off on that aspect. And that's another thing that you can do as well, is introduce different rules once the player, and you know, use some check-ins. Don't make them artificial, but just kind of as you're seeing, okay, some more players. Like one of the things that we do is typically with groups that don't have a lot of RP experience, we'll actually run for like a few sessions. Then usually about a month and a half, 2 months in, we'll kind of go, okay, guys, we're going to do a little short info drop, and we're going to talk about what it means to play in your characters. So you guys have been kind of, you know, goofing around a little bit and doing this, but let's talk about like where your character comes from and what choices they really make. So we actually do kind of a little info drop talking about what it means to role play in character. And we've actually found that when we really explore that backstory and we ask questions like, well, wow, what does that mean? Like, okay, so, you know, your character is in this Old West town, but his family's way back when. Does he talk to his family? Why not? What would happen if he ran into his brother who he got into a fight with? How would he react? And then people start to go, oh, that's okay. You know, so we introduce a lot of these elements sequentially based on the needs of the group and also based on feedback. Because sometimes you can kind of tell they're really getting into their character. So maybe it's time to inject this other element, or, we might introduce, more complicated rules for combat or engagement after they have the basic rules. Because I know, Max, you developed like cue cards for D&D when we were running groups there, where it was, here are your options for what an action is and what a bonus action might be. So this way, if a player's like, well, you can do whatever, maybe that player hasn't conceptualized standard action, bonus action, movement action. But if you give them that guide, they're like, oh, and at first it's going to take a little time, and be patient is the other big piece to that. It really depends on your group, your facilitation level, and also your familiarity with the system, as I say. So there's no correct one answer, but, just depending on your group, just kind of going at it very gently and gingerly is, I guess, a good thing.
Another thing I know we do is we actually bring the rule books with us. I know on our Sunday group, we were looking at switching games up because there was interest into trying new things. We literally just laid out, was it 5 or 6 different rule books?
Yep.
And say, look through them, see if any of them interest you. And we engaged in a conversation at that point.
Yep.
How'd that do with addressing your question, Brian?
Yeah, I think that covers it. Thank you.
Very good.
Okay.
Next one was Grayson Barnes. Grayson had asked, how do you recommend being a trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive GM?
That is a very good question, and a very important question, because and a lot of the times people might be wanting to address trauma material through a game. So I think one way to deal with that is, the lines and veils system. A lot of people sometimes refer to it as like the X card. I like the lines and veils because that it's set up almost like a VCR. You have the play, the pause, the stop, the fast forward, and the rewind that the players can address with that. If a player is addressing, or if play goes into a situation that the player might need a moment before you get into it, you press the pause button and the play stops. And we can address what's going on and then move on.
Yeah, can I table on you for a sec, Max?
Absolutely.
So actually within the Bodhana framework, we actually use all 3 of the current major consent tools. We use X card, lines and veils, as well as what we call it VCR. Some people call it remote control. There's different names for it. But the idea is that with lines and veils or X card is kind of typically during the game. So if content has kind of arisen, the person has a mechanic in a way that they can be able to signal, this is not comfortable for me. Lines and veils, we actually do a lot during our intake process, where we'll ask people privately. So this way they don't have to feel like, okay, we're at a table, everybody talk about what triggers you. No, not the right way to approach this.
Yeah.
Because why would I just openly admit that if it's that much of a trigger element? I mean, if you're going to explore sensitive content, because again, myself and Max specifically, I've worked for, about 20 years of my professional career has been with perpetrators of and victims of sexual abuse. So, talking about the idea of sensitive material, and I know that, one of the other questions that, hopefully we're going to get to talks about talking about discrimination and other types of sensitive topics. It really is your session 0 and the way that you're developing that group communication. It's much like any other sensitive discussion, whether you're a parent trying to keep this open line of communication. It's about creating an accepting, open, non-judgmental space, because the biggest thing is people feeling comfortable to talk about it. And that comfort's not going to come unless they know that they've been heard, that they're being understood, they're not being judged. And that's not just from you as a facilitator. This is also about helping the group understand not how to react in a way that may be unintentionally impactful. One of the biggest kind of reactions to a lot, I'll give you a very short example. In our one of our groups, we were talking about character backgrounds, and we got to a point in the story where one of the persons,
I was gonna.
You're gonna do this?
Yeah.
One of the players was pretty much like, I don't really like going home, and everybody was like, oh, why not? Well, I don't really get along with my older sister. And so just very innocently, again, trigger warning, I'm going to drop some terms, but this is the way the player phrased it. So I say, so why doesn't Ben, which is the character's name, why doesn't Ben like his sister? She molests him. And this player just bang threw the cards out on the table, gin, you know, and the rest of the table was like, uh, and that hadn't been a specific thing that came up because these were young kids. So they're not, you know, you ask most adult groups, automatically child abuse, sexual abuse, animal cruelty. Those are almost automatically your three big ones. But the table was like, so immediately I kind of swoop in. I was like, okay, guys, so now's the perfect time to review the X card. So, you know, player so-and-so has expressed that this is what they would like for their character identity. How does the table feel about that? You know, I said, you don't have to agree with it. You can say this makes me uncomfortable. That's perfectly okay. And it was this beautifully awkward dance where, you know, the kids are kind of like, well, I mean, if it's what they want for their character, I mean, I guess it's okay. I mean, we don't have to like go into any like weird details about it or anything like that, right? And I was like, no, we absolutely do not. And I think it's very big of all of you that you're accepting your other player's choice, but now you're not going to go into detail. And even since then, we've explored story beats where, you know, the
camera story beats.
Exactly,
how
not
this is
descriptive.
playing out.
Yeah,
and the player has glommed onto it, picked it up, thanked us for our understanding of the situation. You know, and it if you're running this therapeutically, and this is something I learned because initially my reaction at the table internally, I'm going, you know, but like outside, like you're a duck on a pond. Like you don't sit there and be the nervous person at the table where they can see that they've now gotten you rattled. Because it's entirely possible this player set it for shock value. You know, so there's a certain level of acceptance that you have to have when you're running these games, that unless the rest of the table has specifically said that this thing will never be brought up, you can't automatically tell a player that dropped something like that on you, well, that's just not acceptable, because it's actually devaluing what they're trying to express. And I know that sounds weird, but if they like the player came up with the idea that this kid had been abused by his older sister, there may be something there that we are not aware of in their personal life that they decided to bring this into the game. And if you immediately step on it and say, well, that's not appropriate here at the table, that's probably what they're getting told everywhere else, or how they feel everywhere else, and they're not expressing it anywhere.
You might be shutting down that person's attempt to then go to another person if in fact it is a real world connection. But at the same hand, you still have to check them with, and a lot of this is, I mean, basic trauma-informed care principles. I mean, I would say before tackling the end of this, make sure that first and foremost, you have training or experience. I mean, again, I've worked in 20 years of doing this. So that at the table was kind of like, oh, in my mind, I'm like, okay, that's a thing. Here's how we're going to provide and proceed. But also I would say, make sure that you have someone else professionally to take situations like that too, because you never, we talk in the persons with sexually problematic behaviors biz, we use a phrase called spreading the risk around. And we do that for multiple reasons. And I advise that in your practice as well. Anyone who's running this kind of content, don't be a sole person here. Like Bodhana always runs with a 2 facilitator model. Always, partially because I'm so invested in the story, maybe I'm missing a beat on something that my co-facilitator saw. So like later when we were playing through that, and the emotional release was, one day after the government conspirators had gassed the characters and they woke up in their beds like a day and a half later, this character woke up, and as Ben was walking towards the kitchen where mom made an oversized stack of waffles, pick up on the subtext, and dad like, hey, go and have a fun day today. Here's $20 to hang out with your friends. And, have I told you I loved you lately? And, hugs. Pass by the room, and it's like, you notice that a lot of your sister's stuff is gone. What? And even the player was like, what? And I go, well, give me a brains roll. What do you notice? You know, because we were kids on bikes, and it was like, well, you notice like some of her private photos. You know, her dresser drawers are open. There's a lot of clothes missing. You know, and her sister basically, while the character was knocked out, and I sent this privately to the player, not in front of the group. I said, Dad found your sister trying to do it again when you were passed out, and your dad, you know, much at the behest of your mom, didn't want your dad to kill your sister, so your sister got sent to juvie. And the player later privately was like, thank you for really understanding what my character was going through. Like, and I was, oh yeah, I've done this kind of work for about 20 years. And she was like, wow, I didn't know that. That's fascinating. And we've seen a lot more animated response from that person. So again, potentially volatile situation, and you never know what's going to come up. So you can do as many lines and veils as you want, but that content might come up out of nervousness. Maybe that if during that game the character said, well, my sister molests me, and one of the other players, holy crap, what the hell? Like, oh my God, that's sick. You don't know what those reactions are going to be. So it's always about being calm, being non-judgmental, being as non-reactionary as you can be from an emotional standpoint. I sometimes call it like the natural blank slate, because you also don't want to interpret for the client. You don't want to go, oh my God, that must be horrible. Some people, believe it or not, who have suffered abuse have rationalized it and go, yeah, that sucked. I guess I'm going to just keep going to work and moving on. I'm fine. It's okay. Not everyone is detrimentally impacted. It's all about knowing the client and be able to navigate that. But yeah, I guess the basics, James, what is
that was a lot. Hopefully
that was a bunch.
that I want to try to get to some of these other ones. Sean Raleigh asked, do you commonly host a session 0 prior to a therapeutic session? If so, how do you commonly run session 0s? Sean, sure do. A lot of the stuff that we actually just talked about are a lot of the things that we talk about in that session 0. It's kind of where we cover our non-acceptable.
My apologies. I do have to step away for 2 seconds. James, if you want to keep continuing, I'm very sorry.
Fine. Yeah.
Okay.
We actually also cover a lot of the character creation during session 0. We kind of like them creating their characters together while they're at the table. It sort of develops in a group of people that don't know each other. Some of that camaraderie that will hopefully translate to the table and get everybody comfortable with playing with each other. But we'll generally do character creation, off-limit topics. I will also hand out, if I'm GMing and it's a new system, I will hand out cheat sheets that have the basic rule structure on the cheat sheets so that everybody has a reference of this is what I can do and when I can do it and how to do it. So that we don't have to keep, looking up stuff in books or interrupting the play to go and find a thing.
Yeah, what James said. Plus a lot of what you would normally do in any private game address in a session 0. So house rules, that sort of thing.
So Graham Hallett, you had asked, I need to understand some of the psychology behind this. Do you have a reading list?
I already plugged Wizards, Warriors, and Wellness again, our book.
So there was, I'm trying to think of the name of the book. It was by an author named Sarah Bowman. That was kind of one of the first books that I read about running therapeutic tabletop RPG. Hawk Robinson.
I was going to say, look at
a lot
RPG Research.
RPGresearch.com. Hawk Robinson does a lot of research into this type of thing and has a lot of resources available there that you can check out. I'm going to see if Jack has anything that he can suggest. Jack.
Hi, we're back.
Reading list for understanding. There you go.
Yes.
Functions of Role-Playing Games by Sarah
Lynn
Bowman.
Bowman.
Is currently
Yes.
holding it up now. Graham had asked if to understand some of the psychology behind this, if there was like a reading list that we could suggest, or like resources or books or things to read that can give some insight. I had suggested Sarah Bowman's book and Hawk Robinson's site for the RPG research, and using the resources that are available on that. The weird thing about this is that there's not a lot of actual like written material yet. There's a lot of folks that are kind of figuring out how to do this and figuring out what works and how what works.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of papers there, and again, Hawk and RPG Research was a great push because he has quite a list of, you know, kind of collected. I mean, I know a lot of emergent stuff is coming out because, I mean, I also check out the various geek therapy movements out there. I know Tony Bean and Leyline, they have a bunch of wonderful trainings and presentations. Bodhana, like I had said, have, you know, at this point, we have 2 CE continuing ed approved trainings through National Board for Certified Counselors. I know there's also a training done by Dr. Rafael Bacamazzo and Dr. Megan Connell. So there's a lot of groups that are providing a lot of different training. As far as actual material, most of what we have thus far is predominantly theoretical. Because, you know, what we're kind of finding is a lot of this, like I had said earlier with my beef stew analogy, was that, you know, a lot of this, you know, people are looking at it as a standalone modality, where in fact it's actually, well, it's a tool set. It's a way to approach working on other goals. So there's a lot of refinement going on. As far as my understanding, like Bodhana's current research study is actually one of the first or one of the more foundational actual clinical trials, where it's not, hey, we talked to Freddie and Freddie's been playing RPGs for 30 years. So we're going to see how he thinks it impacted his life, you know? So it's more of like an anecdotal reflective kind of a thing. So we're actually like, we're using tools like the SPIN and the SSI and, you know, group satisfaction measures to actually try to look at effective change over time. But yeah, that's probably some of your main research, and then you just kind of branch out from there. So, I mean, there's not really quote unquote, there are some books that are coming out about approaches too. And I know, like I said, Tony is one of the big ones that I know offhand, Tony Bean. But there are a lot of other materials that are coming out as well. So I hope that answers the question.
And Hannah, I know a little later you had said that you were also kind of interested in this same thing because you were doing something for a thesis paper with this. Hopefully that gives you something to look at. Want to make sure that you got all of that info as well.
Yeah, and please feel free to reach out to us if you haven't, because, you know, we've participated in a lot of interviews, a lot of research studies, like for people's theses, whether it be for their master's degree or whether it's for their doctorate. So we've actually weighed in on a lot with some of our reflections and some of what we've learned. And again, we sometimes jokingly with ourselves, we kind of are hesitant to refer to ourselves as experts. We have expertise, but in terms of being experts, I think it's still kind of young in this field as a modality, because I mean, we got Hawk doing things from a recreational therapist standpoint. We got people who are doing this from a drama therapy standpoint. We got folks doing this for children, folks doing this for teens, people with adults. There is so much work being done. And one of the biggest kind of prayers, I guess, that we have at Bodhana is let's share. Let's talk with each other. You know, we're not developing the new, you know, streamlined insulin. We're not developing the COVID vaccine. This is not quote unquote a proprietary property. This is one of these things where what we're all learning, whether you're working with trauma, whether you're working LGBTQ, whether you're working with social anxiety, autism spectrum, you know, whatever it is that you're doing, it's imperative. I won't even say it's important. It is imperative at this point that we share our successes, our failures, our misgivings, and our thoughts, because that's the only way that we're going to make sure that we're all developing a standard of practices, because that's really what is at the heart of our need for us as professionals to validate, you know, not only like my 37-year hobby, right, but the fact that we're also validating this as a clinical approach. We need to be able to be sharing this information so that we all know where we're coming from and how we're applying it, so we can get a set of standards and practices, like if you're talking about multi-systemic therapy or internal family systems therapy or all those other wonderful approaches, because we all borrow a little from each tradition, and it really does depend on how you use it. I mean, Hawk has done some phenomenal work with people with traumatic brain injury. Something as simple as like using maps to city transit as a fantasy map to help with like neural pathway reconstruction and memory. And it's like, I'm just sitting and I'm like, dude, that is amazing. Or like, people have talked about using this with PTSD veterans. Another thing, kind of going back to that question, I'm not a veteran. My father was in the war. He didn't talk about Vietnam very much for obvious reason. I wouldn't run a group for veterans. I don't feel that I'm qualified. I don't have the requisite experience. I could theorize out the wazoo about what it might look like and what the possibilities are. I've talked about that. Use the system mashed.
Yeah, get out of my head.
Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that system up. Mashed is very much about the rigors of war set during Vietnam. So we could certainly suggest systems that would be useful for that, but I don't think any of us at that point would feel qualified to run sessions for that particular focus of a group of people.
We have a couple follow-up questions on this. I know Jess had asked about if the trainings provide CE for social work. I don't know.
Not as of yet. That's
Okay.
an excellent question. Actually, one of our board members, I don't know how explicit to be about the response that I got when I had initially even had the material reviewed by one of our board members who has their master's. They're actually in LCSW, or actually an LMSW. So many letters, and we had submitted it even in, working it through that lens. We received a no, I'm sorry. We do not see the therapeutic clinical application of this material. And I kind of went, what? And that was the answer that I got. They just said, nope, we don't see this as being relevant or appropriate to social work and clinical practice. So maybe it's, a little bit more research homework. Maybe it's a little bit more of that data.
Fine. We'll just go out and get a research study. Hey, we've got a research study. We'll talk about that after that.
Yeah, we'll get you those numbers. We'll show you. We'll
also,
tell you what for.
Graham had asked about if they have to be a counselor to take the training. No, we had quite a few educators come to the training last year. It's just you wouldn't necessarily get the continuing education.
We are also, not like for credit, obviously, but we are also in the midst of developing two programs, one that I'm actually spearheading that is going to be training people on how to GM. Not even necessarily therapeutic GMing, but really just how to GM games so that we can take, because players have expressed interest in learning this skill. So we can take players that have played in our groups, that have joined us for this, that have, benefited from this themselves, and just teaching them how to run groups for their friends, and just doing a whole series of lessons about that. We're also going to be looking at our own internal certification.
Yeah, we've even had in our, I'm sorry, you froze. Okay. I thought you were
We're
done.
going to be looking to do our own internal certification process to certify therapeutic GMs, to make that, I guess, sound more official.
Yeah, one of our dreams, I guess, within Bodhana, talking to a bunch of other professionals, and I know that there are a couple of faces I know and folks that I know that were at Save Against Fear last year when we had a lot of this conversation during our focus group breakout. But, we really envision, like, our dream is to create a foundation of sorts that helps with providing some of these questions. We don't think that any one entity should own that. Because it's very much it should be a body of professionals that kind of weigh in on what these standards and practices are and how we can share these things that we've learned about it for a best practice approach. But we are a bit hesitant on the idea of like rent setting and gatekeeping, because to be honest, we had people have asked, well, should only a master's level clinician do that? Well, no, I think that an undergraduate degree, especially if it's in psychology or clinical work, if you have that requisite experience and you're with other professionals, like I'll be quite frank, I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm a master's degree therapist, but I have a lot of experience running group. So technically, if they go, well, you need to have a license to do this kind of work. Well, I'm out. So, thanks. I enjoy all that I've provided, and we're just going to kind of move on. But again, it's more about how are people trained? How are people certified? How are we providing supervision and acknowledgement? So that's a big part of this, because we had one person and actually I've seen Brendan shake his head. He remembers this. We had a gentleman there who was, he had his undergraduate degree and he specialized in drug and alcohol treatment. And he literally was very like, well, wait a minute. I know how to do this. And I know that, what I'm doing is good work. And so if you say masters and above, what about a DSP or a direct support professional? If you're working in like a facility-based setting, yeah, we can train a DSP to run board games. We can run a DSP to be a co-facilitator. Again, James is an excellent therapeutic game master. He does not have clinical training. We partner folks with, because we do have to make sure that we have that clinical piece when we're doing clinical work. But a lot of what James's skill set, and I mean, he's learned a lot. I'll say that, a virtual pat on the back there and a hug. But
Thanks,
hey, no problem. The whole idea is we still have the clinical piece, but James's ability to teach therapists as an experienced game master, like to me, that's the other skill transfer of this, right? You don't just have to be a good GM, a therapist to do this. In fact, I know plenty of therapists who should probably not do this because they're not good GMs. I had a therapist call Bodana or emailed us and literally said, so can you tell me where to find the therapeutic modules? And I said, I don't know. Where are they? Because they're not there, because the whole thrust of the model is to customize and individualize the adventure to the needs of the client and the facilitators. So you should be making your own.
Honestly, part of our process is like, I'll come up with a story and I float it by Jack. And I use the intake forms that we have based on what everybody wants to work on as far as their set of skills. What do they want to get out of this game? I tailor the story to that. I run it by Jack to make sure that it's hitting all the beats that we need to hit. Then for that group, like some of them we run for larger organizations. So I will then go to that facilitator and say, hey, here's what we're planning on doing. This is what we're presenting. Do you think any of this material is going to like trigger any of your people? Is there anything that's too heavy-handed? Are we not approaching something with enough gusto? And I get feedback not just from our stuff internally, but then if there is somebody else that facilitates for the group we're running, I run it by them as well. And then that way I've got all of my bases covered. And I know when it comes to game day, all I've got to do is do what I know how to do, which is to GM a game. And I've already got all the parameters laid out. I know exactly where I need to go with.
And as he's running, then I, as the facilitator, can kind of sit back and go, tell me, I spy with my clinical eye something beginning with A, advocacy. Yeah. All right. So that enables me to then, again, get that info. I'm sorry, we probably have more questions. I have chronic run-of-the-mouth disease.
There is a quick one that I see 2 times come up, whether or not our trainings are available online. Not currently, but this is the year of COVID, and we're learning to do things online. Short answer to that.
Yeah, now we are able to offer these trainings because we're actually, just to give you a basic breakdown to answer that question. So we have a 101 training, which is basically theory and basic application. So we talk about what the model borrows from, why it works, and how we orchestrate and run our groups. Then the 201 is about creating and implementing therapeutically driven content into the narrative. So it literally, we talk about everything from how to do tension, how to do pacing, how to create challenges. What we've recently done is we've just kind of put some of the finishing touches on our 301 training, which is actually going to be a practicum. So the idea with that 301, which is just this close to being able to be run, is that we will take therapists and we will group you in a group of about 4 to 5 people, and you will create a therapeutic one-shot. that is based on redacted client case studies that you bring, or we will have designed people, and you will create an adventure as a team with therapeutic goals. And then there's a rubric to follow, and then you will run your one shot for one of the other study groups. So in this way, you are not only getting the experience as the provider of the session and the developer, but you're also getting valuable experience as the player throughout this process, so you can see how it feels on the other side to get this content. So my global answer to that is, if you don't care about CEs, or you get them at another conference somewhere, we can run these online without worry about the CE. You could tell me tomorrow, Jack, 9:00 a.m., could you do a training for me? Absolutely. I'll send you the documents. We'll get it set up. And we've done that and are looking to do more of that in the next year. But yeah, that's kind of our goal. And we are searching, like Max said, for ways to, amidst COVID, and then, folks going, you know what, maybe you could run this online, and that's okay. Awesome. So we're working on that. And again, emailing us is probably the best way to get more information about that.
So I see Josh Davis is still here. Josh had asked a while ago,
Mm-hmm.
how does a player go about making a game more therapeutic for themselves, whether or not that is the overall intention of the campaign/session?
Ooh, wow.
I would say first, be careful about that. Your friends might not want to play with you anymore if you become the.
Well, he's asking like how
therapy.
players make it more therapeutic.
Yeah.
However,
Josh, if you're willing, would you mind kind of like fleshing out the question just to make sure we're answering the right thing?
Yeah, thanks. No, I'm interested in a lot of different sides of it. So like the question of how can someone be a better player in a therapeutic game is also of interest. But
Okay.
I found there are opportunities sometimes to do like personal development in role-playing games as a player. And I was thinking of that when I asked the question.
So a lot of that is up to, really, it's up to player agency. One of the things that we try to do when we're doing these sessions is we try to not tell the players up front, like, and today we will be serving therapy. Like that's like we try to stay away from that, because that makes it like super intentional. And then
hold on, let me get my therapy hammer. Hold on, here we go. All right, lesson.
So the part about like how players can make it more therapeutic for themselves is really about how much they embrace it and what they put into it. Is really like what they're to steal that IT phrase, like it's a little bit of ego.
Yeah.
There's garbage in, garbage out.
I would say a big part of that is like, think about, just as a guide point, you can play, like when I was 12 and I started role playing, it was all wish fulfillment. My Marvel character, John Airedale, who was Volver, the boomerang slinging superhero, his wife in the game would just so happened to have the same first name as a girl I had a huge crush on in high school. So it was wish fulfillment. But then as I was exploring some of my own issues with like having adult ADD and things like that, I then started to play more meaningful characters, and I started to play less of the fop, because I'd always use humor to deflect. So privately, even without direct therapeutic intention, I was role-playing characters that were designed even for myself. I want to explore more about me, but I was doing it subconsciously. And it was only when we started developing the model for Bodhana that I really analyzed my play over the years. And I was like, holy crap, like I really went deep on that character. Maybe I needed that at that time in my life. So we use two phrases in Bodhana. We say that we either seed the bleed or heed the bleed. So bleed, of course, is the interplay between player character identities. So when we feed the bleed or seed the bleed, we're either planting that, and we know that we want to grow that and develop it into something, or we heed the bleed. That's something I want to avoid or not go deep into. So it's designing a character of either who you want to be or design the character that you do not want to be. And usually that either approach or avoidant kind of mechanic is the way that a player can kind of do that. So if you feel you're a little shy, maybe you want to make a character who is a diplomat. Why? You're forcing yourself in game to talk more and to advocate more. So people can select those skills. Again, I think the thing Max was referring to is hey, I want to explore my sexual trauma through this game with my friends. Please don't do that or advocate doing that,
And
because
and on
it's dangerous.
and like as a personal story for me, with part of my background is I have a daughter from an ex who lives out of state, so I don't get to see my daughter often. What I've just recently done as a character is playing a traveling bard who is trying to save the world and has to be away from his family, and as a way of trying to better connect to that emotion. So I think that might be a little bit of what you're talking about. Yeah, you can do that, and you can do that narratively, very simple with background and how you play, and let it help you.
Yeah.
And honestly, your friends might not even know you're doing that.
Yeah, that is truth. I mean, because even preparing players to be more therapeutic around the table, that is complete session zero, where that is absolutely talking about safe spaces, talking about respecting other people's portrayals, even talking about, like, if someone's going to be playing someone who's LGBTQ or playing someone with anxiety or playing someone on the spectrum. I mean, there's a lot that, Doug and John and company in the Kids on Bike series have written about playing non-neurotypical characters, playing people maybe with physical disability as well. And there's a lot to the table. I mean, it's very weird when you look at things like, I watch a lot of 70s TV, and I go back and I look at, like, portrayals of people who are, homosexual, or I look at, portrayals of people with disability at that time. And people are like, oh my God, it's so insensitive, it's ridiculous. And I go, well, let's look at where we've come there, and let's kind of agree at the table that maybe the way that we're approaching the portrayal of this character, like, not every person on the autism spectrum is Rain Man. And can we be respectful, whether or not we have someone at the table who has that condition? Because I think it's even about that. Like, don't just use, like, a stereotypical, voice because a person of that race or a person of that heritage is at the table. Let's just not do that, because maybe it's not the best choice. So I think providing players to be more respectful and intentional, the more you have that out there in the front, and the more that you go, this is kind of our ground rules as a group. And if you have new players come in, revisit those rules, maybe even revisit them every couple of months to make sure that everybody kind of knows how level the playing field is. Does that answer the question, Josh?
Yeah, thanks. Those are good thoughts.
Okay, wonderful.
Jack, you're almost prophetic, because I know the next question we had dealt with the concept of social iniquity and how to
Yes.
deal with that, which I find funny that we're bringing this up, because I don't know if other people are as connected on Twitter as I have been, but that was a major issue with D&D recently.
Still is.
Yeah, the question of, like, orcs are evil, drow are evil. How can we deal deal with that?
Well,
That that could be a way of dealing with social iniquity and addressing that material. Maybe not, maybe the view of society is that all drow are evil or all orcs are evil, but your players might run into a good orc tribe, or even just a good orc, and that person or that character might have to deal with that prejudice. And I think that's a beautiful story that can be told through that.
Well, but you're, as always, everything about therapeutic, or I mean, even stepping away from the therapeutic piece clinically, any type of layer of intention that you want to inject into a game, you always must have player consent. So
Absolutely.
if we're going to be exploring these themes, because again, we run a Deadlands game. So, a big part of our session zero in that process was James, and us, we were pretty honest about saying, guys, this is the late 1800s. It was not the most socially aware time. So in some settings, in some games, people play racial stereotypes, period accurate. You can do that if your group is comfortable exploring the themes, like the whole idea of I play a Native American character named Shiloh, and Shiloh is based very kind of accurately on being a member of the Paiute tribe. And, so I did research into the Paiute tribe, and, I'm not playing it like how me heap plenty many, it's not playing it for laughs or for stereotype, playing him as a serious, he believes in, the Mother Earth and the land and the old ways, and a lot of like the reaction that townspeople give to him when he comes into a new town, we play that real. People don't listen to him in conversation just because he's a dramatic character. That's the context of the town. But we had that conversation with our group early, saying this might come up in an adventure. Is anyone extremely uncomfortable with that? And if they would have been, we would have excised that completely from our playbook. We ripped that sheet out. Why? They don't want that content. I know that there are groups, I believe his name is Josh Heath, is doing a lot of work with intentionality, with social dialogue, using role-playing game as an approach. So, a lot of his work is, let's get cultures who are in opposition to each other. Let's try to get those folks around a table through role-playing, whether it's live action or whether it's tabletop. A lot of approaches. So the ability for role-playing to have some of these discussions and some of these interactions is highly powerful. It is all about being sure that you are trained and that you are experienced in providing the type of content that you want, but also making sure that your players at any level are prepared. Now, we don't say, okay, this session, we're going to test your social skills through anxiety. If it's that much on the head, the person could remove themselves from it. But we know these are the goals you're working on. Is it okay if throughout the sessions we do this? And we still do occasional check-in, but that's a way for us to make sure that our players' safety and our players' feelings of safety are maintained. Go ahead, Matt.
I just ended a really like high emotionally charged arc.
Oh yeah.
In the Deadlands game, and several things happened that have tugged on the heartstring of my players, and I can see it at the table. And this is also going to answer Misty's question of how do you manage a limited time, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, things like that. So at the beginning of each of these sessions, I have a quick, okay, everybody focus up. You're now in character. Everything from this point on that you say is said in character. We are dealing with character emotions. We are dealing with character trauma. And we want to give these things the attention that it deserves, so that each of the players can react accordingly and kind of get into the game. I really thought that we were going to have hesitation, or that there was going to be interruptions, or that, we were going to run into all sorts of derailing things. And I'll tell you what, for 3 sessions straight now, those kids have not been the most focused that I think they have been at the table since we started playing. Yeah. And it was just because we set that one stricture, So Misty, in answer to your question, I would tell you the first thing that I would do is I would set that kind of a thing, especially if you only have like 45 or 60 minutes to do what it is that you're doing. Everybody just needs to be focused. It's very easy at an RPG table to just go off topic and to, make inside jokes, and everybody's having a good time. It's a social game.
Yeah.
But when you need to get through something, you need to get through something. We have also run sessions in real time where we have given the players, like, they knew what they had to get done. What they didn't know when they got there was that we are only giving them the 2 hours that we have for the session to get it done in, because those 2 hours are running in real time in the game. So we 24th. We gave them physical puzzles that they had to sit and solve at the table, riddles that they had to come up with, and we put them through a teleporting doorway. So everybody had to randomly roll for which group they ended up in. So the same kids that have been playing together for months weren't playing with the same people that they were used to playing with. So there was that added awkward social component on top of the time component. So another way to manage your time, run it in real time.
Yeah.
You know, you have 60 minutes, they have an hour. They have an hour to do a thing. And time starts now. You know,
Yeah.
as long as you have those conversations beforehand, you can run things pretty effectively within a certain amount of time. I hope that answers that one as well as the other one.
Yeah, I mean, standard Bodhana sessions are about 2 hours in length. We start with a 15-minute, how's your father, as we call, like, how was your week? How's everything? Anything new? What have you been doing? Then we build in roughly about 90 minutes for the actual story content, which allows a little bit for distraction. And then we always end with bookkeeping and, you know, checkout procedure, kind of standard with any group. What'd you like? What didn't you like? You know, what would you like to see more of? What would you like to see less of? And then we kind of break group there. So that's a lot of what we kind of built into that practice. So yeah, when you're working with 45 minutes to an hour, I mean, remember, on one hand, it's limited time, but another hand, you can tell great stories in 42, what is it, 42 minutes, I think is the average length without commercials of an average TV episode. So you could tell some pretty powerful stories. It then falls to, what is your pacing? What is your tension? Like, how are you progressing at that point?
Is Dre Woven still in the room? I didn't know if maybe that was a nickname that was different.
That's actually a very good question, though. So
So the question was, in your experience running with kids, can you pro v con dice pool versus dice plus stat mechanic?
Wow.
I would say it depends on the age of the kid and the kids in general.
Yeah,
Because,
cognitive level is big there.
I tend to want to go smaller. You can always start out smaller and get more complicated. It is way harder to go complicated at a table, have your players not pick it up or not understand what you're doing, and then have to back it off.
Because with the dice pool mechanic, like what happens with Shadowrun and White Wolf, or what is it now, World of Darkness, you count the number of dice that you have above a certain number. Most kids can do that. You roll dice, okay, put all the 5s or higher to the side. How many do you have? Whereas the target number based ones, you roll and trying to add things together to hit target number. It's a little bit more arithmetic involved. So I would say probably the dice pool mechanic is better for younger. That's just my feel on the matter. Or
Okay.
for people who don't have a lot of skill in arithmetic. But then again, that might be part of the target. Maybe the player wants to get better at arithmetic, and it really depends on the individual and the group, is what I would say.
And I think a lot of this dovetails into a question. I know that Elisa, you are still here, so I want to make sure that we kind of, because you had another excellent question, you know, about, you know, which mechanics are effective therapeutically, and really there aren't any that are quote unquote pass fail that, you know, we can distinctively say one is, one isn't. I mean, we've seen that for some people, movement mechanics and like heavily gridded combat, that could be beneficial for some people that are very concrete thinkers. That could be very, very non-beneficial for people who are very theater of the mind, you know, or folks who may want to kind of visualize that. So a lot of things with mechanics, you know, above all with any therapeutic process, is know the client. But also in this model, it's also equally as imperative to know the player, you know, because they have a client identity, which is the goals you're working on. There is also the player identity of what the player is geared towards. So it is a very careful dance, I will say that. I mean, I would say in terms of agency, anything that if it is explicitly tied to a goal acquisition, and we kind of touched on this a little bit before, like anything that directly, like James said about making a role for diplomacy as opposed to role playing it out. If a role, and when we talk about things like spells for control or spells for charm, you know, this comes up a lot in therapeutic discussion about RPG, that, you know, if I make a charm roll and all of a sudden I have control of your character, that's tremendously impactful to a person. You know, one of the, we all need to feel agency in our lives. That's a common human trait to wellness. So if we talk about something that takes away your player's ability to choose, you're really removing, like I would say if there's anything that we could kind of say is like an automatic no, that's probably one that's pretty heavy on the list, maybe because it's robbing a player of the ability to do something, even if it's the wrong thing, that they make a choice that's not the best choice. You're still taking away that ability of control. And your whole idea about therapeutic role playing is to engage the person in what they can do about a problem and explore where it goes from there. So I hope that answered your question. I noticed according to the chat, you're still here. Was there another aspect to that maybe I didn't address or we didn't address? Because again, it's a great question. I want to make sure to give some time.
I would also add, typically the heavier mechanics and anything that would take out of the immersion would be typically less useful. However, that could be an actual intention. Especially there's a lot of talk about the use with like schizoaffective disorder. If somebody's well advanced in therapy and wants practice separating fantasy from reality, heavier mechanics might be a good tool in that, because you pull yourself out of the fantasy to go into like the combat and things like that. So again, as Jack said, it really depends on the people you're supporting. But yeah, if you have any other questions with that, please ask.
Yeah.
Yes.
Any others we missed, James?
Yeah, Jess. She had asked thoughts on one-on-one RPGs for individual clients working through trauma.
Ooh,
yeah. We've had a situation, and I think this is going to be one of those situational type of answers. We have an individual in one of our groups that is not necessarily feeling the current game that we're running and really wants to go back to an old game that we played and wants to kind of re-explore his character in a different way, but he would not in any way benefit from a one-on-one type of game. Now, there may be some people that would benefit from a one-on-one game. I think if you're specifically dealing with working through trauma, I would be careful in a one-on-one session about the level of immersion during that game session. There's working through trauma, and then there's triggering, during that type of thing. And with it being one-on-one, that can sometimes be difficult to manage or control.
Yeah, it really depends on the goal of the therapy, because one-to-one, you have certain limitations in that you're telling one person's story. So, I mean, you do have a tremendous opportunity with that kind of model that I would say could be beneficial, especially if you're getting a person to manage their own reaction, maybe to like traumatic memory or something intrusive thought-based, or, to that degree. So there is the opportunity you can role play, through those situations by way of like metaphor and allegory and, different experiences where, in that case, it would be if the goal is to get that person to open up, if that goal is to get that person to talk more, you could put them in the role of like the healer or the fixer. So maybe as a player character, they encounter a situation of abuse. How do they respond to it? How might they advise an impacted non-player character? So you're putting that person then into the role of healer, where now they are providing the consult or the comfort to like another non-player character as an entity. So you have the opportunity there to explore that content in a way that is more safe space for that person. Now, it might be more impactful maybe later to look at, could we maybe have a group of people who have been through that sharing their experience? That could be beneficial. It really, a lot of it is you're going to have to front load a lot of activity because you have one person driving the story essentially as the player character. So you're going to have to do a little bit more heavy lifting in some points. But, there are a lot of folks ask about, is one-to-one appropriate? It really depends on the goal. I think with trauma, you've already hit on, a couple of things that, yeah, one-to-one exploring those types of themes is definitely something that could be better accomplished in an isolated environment, especially if the player as client is not yet ready to bring that to a larger group. So it may be a great starting off point. They might not benefit from the support of other people. It may be a personal journey. So yeah, that's something you could definitely explore. And again, we'd be willing to help and assist in any way in terms of consulting on that. Did that address your question? Because I notice hopefully it's the same Jess that is still here. You can either type a response or speak up if you want. Oh, there you are. Hello.
That's me.
Hey,
Yes,
you were one of the first ones that got here. How are you?
I was. I'm good. How are you?
Great. This is wonderful.
Yeah, I used to work in primarily group practice, and now I generally have individual clients.
Okay.
So I just wanted to ask about that.
Okay. Did we successfully kind of address or answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Oh, no. Thank you.
I think that's everything that I see in the chat.
I see Dennis, he's no longer with us, but he asked 2 questions. One deals with adults versus children and the differences. I think we've addressed that a little bit already in relation to cognitive abilities and understanding things along those lines. But the other question he asked, I think, is very interesting. He had asked about how you deal with neurodiversity in characters in a setting where most of the times you think high equals good. And I think that's a really good question. I think one of the ways I know I would address that is that in the D&D terms, we do something along the lines of the standard array. So everyone is not so good at one thing and good at other things. Because I think that's pretty real for people in general, in the real world. And if somebody might have, again, in D&D terms, an 8 in intelligence, they're going to have a 15 in something, and try to focus some of the narrative arcs to showcase what that strength is. So it's not all just, smarts is good. Sometimes strengths, sometimes charisma helps, and that sort of thing. That's how I would address that, Jack.
No, I think that more than adequately answers it. I mean, yeah.
And I know Becky had asked about internships. I would say email us. That's the easiest way of addressing that. We can talk from there.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to put the email address to the Bodana group into the chat. There we go. And I'll also put our website in there as well for anyone that wants to reach out. And again, we help on a variety of different projects, whether you're a researcher, or whether you are within your own student tree, as it were. But also if you want information about maybe even volunteering, participating, we are currently going to be trying to present at Save Against Fear this year a lot of therapist-run panels and workshops that are going to focus on anything from, topics like we're discussing here, all the way up to, hey, here's this cool game that I use in my practice and I want to tell you about it. So it might be introducing someone to the Quiet Year or Itris By, or, just another role-playing game property. So fully, if you are a professional, we encourage you to, submit panels or, come and be an attendee and participate. Again, it's a lot of fun, and we eventually want Save Against Fear to be a conference convention. So it would be come for the panels, stay for the games. Which is one of the ways we're kind of looking at it for the future. So were there any questions from anyone here that we might have missed or that maybe come up through the discussion? Otherwise, we'll kind of say thank you. This has been phenomenal. We're almost an hour over our original time, but it's this great conversation, and we hope it's been beneficial to everyone. If folks have stuck around, obviously it seems to be enjoyable and informative. So that's what we hope. Getting discussion,
We will be back tomorrow.
Yes.
Also at 1:00 to talk about not what we talked about today, or maybe what we did, but in a different form. We'll see. And then
Bringing characters to life.
And then Saturday, we will be back at 1:00, where we will again have a different topic it might also maybe talk about some of the stuff that we've mentioned.
Yeah, so tomorrow's bringing characters to life, which is all about analyzing and breaking down the character sheet and how it can be used specifically for different therapeutic discussions and benefits. Then Saturday at 1 is ASD at your FLGS. So we break down and demystify autism spectrum disorders. We talk about what at the gaming table you might run into, what you might encounter, how to be a more accommodating and inviting and inclusive table. And this is designed not only for owners of game stores, but also patrons of game stores, friends and allies. So it's a great panel, and we actually invite a couple of our other partner professionals from other agencies who in their own practice work with people on the spectrum, utilizing role-playing and tabletop. So that's kind of it for now. What I would say is after the formal presentation, we shut off. If anybody would have any like private questions that they maybe didn't feel comfortable asking the group, we will also offer that potential. But without further ado, if there's nothing else, I'd like to, again, on behalf of Bodana, say thank you for everyone for coming out to the panel. We're glad that you enjoyed, and we hopefully will see you at another one. And if so, we'll give you a Heidi hello and a hand wave.
Enjoy the rest of your online Gen Con, everybody.
Yeah, GenCon Online, ho!
Now with less walking.
Okay, and end recording now.